not with the milk teeth, but the next round, there's a problem. But what about an adult who's now thinking, I wish I'd have known all of that. What can I do for my crowded teeth? In terms of looking after your mouth, nothing not to do with food and diet now. What can you suggest, whether it's quantum or don't use fluoride toothpaste? Hello and welcome. I'm Sarah, and today I've got a superb guest, Dr. Jalal Khan, who is a quantum dentist. And in this podcast, we have some great discussions about dentistry, things like crowded teeth, what to do for children and also for adults, and what not to do. Also about root canals, mercury, general oral hygiene, and little tips there. But also we talk about other aspects of health and how quantum biology and light can help us become the best version of ourselves. We also delve into a little bit of spirituality at the end. So I hope you enjoy listening to Dr. Khan as much as I did.
Well, firstly, thank you so much for having me, Sarah. And the journey to where I am now has been convoluted, has been lots of ups and downs, and I really feel like I'm getting closer to what I believe to be true healing for people. So the journey started for me. Always knew I wanted to go into health. And so there was always options like medicine and dentistry, and life took me towards dentistry, which I'm very grateful for. And partly because it probably saved me from getting stuck in centralized hospitals. But I was practicing dentistry for a long time, just the typical type of dentistry, which is where you focus on the teeth because that's all you're really taught at dental school, internationally, really. And I was, working on teeth and salvaging teeth and not really thinking about the bigger picture at all until probably about 5 or 6 years ago when I started to question something as simple as why are teeth crowded in the first place? And so that takes you down a journey into, okay, well, what is the reason behind why teeth are crowded? And I thought I had the answer 3 years ago. But some of my recent learnings, even in the last 6 months, have really kind of brought my paradigm of thinking around crowded teeth forward, and I'm sure we can get into that later. But in parallel to my journey, I guess, out of centralized dentistry towards functional integrative dentistry, and to now what I feel is like a quantum dentistry paradigm, there was also this parallel journey of mine, which was understanding just how the body actually works. What does health actually look like? So rather than just focusing on disease and focusing on what's wrong and how to fix it with the usual approaches that that health clinicians are pushing out, I was kind of looking at root cause, and for a little while I was focusing on things like diet and exercise, like most of us do initially when we're heading down that journey. My wife did have some health issues which were difficult to work through, and we weren't getting much progress with the doctors and the specialists. And so, given my dental background, and I'd spent 2 years doing medical lectures, I understood the jargon. So I kind of took it upon myself to really dig deep and try and find the truth behind, or the reasons behind some of the things that she was going through. And luckily, a patient told me about Dr. Jack Kruse and said, you should really look into that. And so the rest is history, really, because as you know, Dr. Jack Kruse has pieced together many things from different fields of science and medicine and art, and he's done a brilliant job of really catapulting quantum biology to where it should be, which is center stage of health. And so I guess quantum dentistry for me is bringing both of those worlds together, is bringing in the posture, is bringing in the is bringing in crowded teeth as well as circadian and quantum biology, and marrying them together with this approach that appreciates that the mouth is also a big aspect of the non-linear system that we have, this quantum thermodynamic system that is us. And we talk a lot about how light is a non-linear stimulus, and how when photons of light come in through the eyes and hit the retina, they get amplified a millionfold. Well, the same can be said for the mouth, in that when things are off in the mouth, there can be a butterfly effect where a part of the body that's completely distant from where the mouth is being thrown off, is being compensated for. There's compensations in those parts of the body that are far away. So there's definitely a non-linear aspect to the postural and fascia side of things, and I feel the mouth has a big role to play in that.
Oh, no, that's really interesting because again, the TMJ is in that area, and then maybe you want to elaborate a bit more on posture and maybe start with the in the mouth, because you mentioned crowded teeth a few times. I would imagine a tooth implant, a root canal, an extraction, an abscess, um, can all contribute to alterations in posture. And then I think tying in with that on a quantum level, like I asked you privately, how do you think light in our offices or environment or workplace affects our posture? Because plants can do phototropism, as in they lean toward, everybody's had a plant and it starts to lean towards the sunlight. And again, as you mentioned, there's the non-linear effect of the photons and the mouth. So a small amount of light, say I've always got my lamp here, could possibly, I don't know the answer, have some effect posturally further down the line.
Yeah, like that's an interesting thought. I would say that I don't have the answer myself, but we could kind of workshop that, and I would feel that if we are having lights around us that are of a better wavelength than the blue light that we're covered in on a day-to-day basis, that's definitely going to have an impact on the structured water that is inside the fascia and how the information is flowing through that quantum communication highway, as Carrie Bennett really beautifully describes it as. So I think that's one big role that light has to play, as well as on posture, that kind of fascia or fascial aspect of it. The other thing is I think just the whole mood and how blue light can affect our mood negatively, particularly when it's not balanced by red, and how our posture is when we are in particular moods. So like if you're grumpy, or if you're sad, or if you don't want to be where you are right now, your shoulders drop and they kind of lean forward, and then you start to get the rounded back and they get the forward head posture and all those types of things. So I think mood can also affect posture, and light feeds into mood. But on other topics around postural dentistry and like kind of elaborating on the crowded teeth side of things, I think it's fair to say there is an epidemic of people that have crowded teeth, right? And the evidence for that is no fancy randomized control trial, but just go walk through the park and just see how many people have got crowded teeth, or if they've got straight teeth, how many of them needed to be straightened with orthodontics or braces. And so it's quite a lot of people. So we should be starting to ask the question about why are teeth crowded in the first place. And for a long time, I was of the understanding that there are three main reasons why teeth are crowded. And those are, firstly, a child is not breastfed or not breastfed for long enough. And I always say that with respect to mothers, because I know how difficult it can be for some mothers to breastfeed. But the second reason is that we're raising children that are not chewing foods. They're usually sucking foods because we're giving them sachets of vegetables or things that are mushed up, rather than encouraging the children to chew through the food and swallow correctly. And a lot of the time that is for fear of the child not being able to swallow that correctly. But then what we have is many children that are growing up with a dysfunctional swallow, where the swallow that they have as an infant carries through into the adolescence and into their adulthood. And that deeply affects the way that the upper jaw grows and the cranial bones and all those types of things. And then the third thing is we have a lot of children that are growing up with blocked noses. And so when they got blocked noses, we need to breathe, right? Because if we don't work out how to breathe, we're going to die. So quite literally, so we open our mouths. And in doing so, that changes the nitric oxide in the air that we're breathing in. It changes the carbon dioxide tensions, and the carbon dioxide is a big buffer for the blood. It kind of acts as, what's the term? Well, it changes the pH. So if the pH goes out of the range of 7.35 to 7.45, this is the pH of the blood. Carbon dioxide is used to bring it back in. It can turn into bicarbonate, or it can turn into carbonic acid. And so if we are breathing through our mouth, we are breathing out too much carbon dioxide, 4 times as much air as we would if we were breathing out through our nose. So when we dump too much carbon dioxide, we have less carbon dioxide in the system, and so we can't buffer the blood levels adequately. But the other aspect of mouth breathing is you miss out on the nitric oxide that is released from the paranasal sinuses when we are breathing in through our nose. The air doesn't get taken down deeply into the lungs. It only kind of stays in the top 2/3. And finally, and most importantly, the tongue is down in the mouth. It never gets to be where it should be at rest, where yours should be right now while you're listening, which is up against the roof of the mouth. And the tongue is the best orthodontist on the planet. It does the best job of pushing the teeth out, pushing the jaws forward, and getting the jaws out of the cranium. So when the tongue is not doing what it's supposed to do, because it's a dysfunctional swallow, because it's down, because the mouth is open to help the child breathe, we start to have an issue where the jaws are not growing forwards and out of the cranium. So they're stuck back. That means they're small. They can't properly express. And when you've got small jaws, the teeth have got to fit somewhere. So they start to crowd and misalign in order to make things work. But there's a fourth reason, and this is, for me, probably the most important reason. And it's kind of that's where we start to go into the cranial and osteopathic side of things, because a jaw that is restricted from growing downwards and forwards out of the cranium is because the cranium is locked up in some way. And so a lot of patients that have got headaches and migraines and TMJ issues, it's not necessarily a jaw issue, it's actually a cranial bone issue. So the next question is, how can the cranium get locked up? So the cranium has this kind of rhythmic motion where the bones actually move out and back in, they flex and extend. And this is happening while we are breathing. And it happens in sync with the sacrum, which is our tailbone, and how the tailbone moves. And so when we have this cranial and sacral movement of the bones, and are you familiar with the dura mater?
No, I am familiar with what you're describing from the connection between the pelvis and the head, though. So maybe if you carry on so that other people can kind of understand as well.
Sure. So the cranium is connected to the sacrum, the tailbone, via something called the dura mater, Duramater. And it's essentially a very thin, very tough membrane, kind of like the membrane on the top of a drum. And it attaches into the tailbone and wraps around the spinal cord, encapsulating the spinal cord, and then comes in through the foramen magnum, which is the hole at the base of the head through which the brain kind of extends into the brainstem and then into the spinal cord. So the dura mater comes up and then attaches into our head from the inside. And so what happens is we've got this rhythmic motion of the cranium and the sacrum happening in sync. It's quite beautiful. And it's actually something which develops in the mother's womb when the embryo is growing into a fetus. And you and I have still got it today. But what happens is when we have traumas along the way, which is just part of growing up, maybe you're riding a horse and you fell off and landed on your tailbone, or maybe you were playing hockey and accidentally you got hit in the head by someone else that was trying to swing at the ball. Those types of instances actually create literally blunt force trauma to the head or the tailbone, and that affects the this respiratory motion of the bones. So respiration isn't necessarily just about oxygen and carbon dioxide. Respiration is really more about motion, and the diaphragm and its motion is key to the secondary respiration, which is the respiration that the breathing that most of us think about, which is oxygen and carbon dioxide. But coming back to this craniosacral mechanism that we have here, if we have a trauma, it inhibits the bones from moving as rhythmically and nicely as they should. And so once that seizes up and once it locks up, it still moves, it just doesn't move as well. Then what happens is the jaws can't come forward and express themselves fully. And so time and time again, with the recent work that I've been doing with a colleague who's an osteopath, every single patient that has crowded teeth, that has TMJ issues, that has postural pain, has something wrong with their sacrum, and they have something, and or they have something wrong with their cranium. And so when we start to ask the questions, okay, can you recall having any knocks on your head when you were growing up, or your tailbone? And there's always something. It could even be dating back to birth, because there's various birth traumas as well. The one of the From a cranial perspective, one of the benefits of it being a natural birth is that the birth canal actually shapes the cranial bones as the baby passes through. So if a baby is born C-section, they completely miss out on that. And if a baby is born naturally, but forceps or a vacuum is required to kind of grab a hold of the baby's head in order to deliver the baby, then that can also have birth traumas. And we see many patients on a weekly basis who still have the marks on their head from when the forceps were used. And these are adult patients in their 30s, 40s, and 50s. So these types of traumas affect this craniosacral respiratory mechanism, which then affects the ability for the jaws to express properly. And so what we have crowded teeth, or bent smiles, but we also have bent craniums. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, definitely. I also agree with you about all of this, because I ask people about head and tailbone traumas, and then it correlates back to headaches and mood issues. Because if you've got a bent cranium, an osteopath friend of mine said, if I was a brain and a piece of bone was pressing on me, I'd be in a bad mood all the time. So
100%.
that kind of loops back to what you were saying about mood and posture, and what is it that's making us in a bad mood, and it can be a new number of things. So yes, that makes sense. I think for any adults who have got crowded teeth still, because that was massively helpful for, say, if you have a child, and I know that there's, you might notice not with the milk teeth, but the next round there's a problem. But what about an adult who's now thinking, I wish I'd have known all of that. What can I do for my crowded teeth?
That's a really good question. And there's definitely ways that we can reverse or correct the situation. I think it's really important to first understand deeply what I've just laid out, because that is the truth behind why teeth are crowded. It's really to do with the craniums and the sacrums. Another thing I'd like to add is that the parasympathetic nerves actually come out through the cranium and through the sacrum. So craniosacral isn't just about the respiratory motion, it's also about parasympathetic. So we have lots of kids that are coming in that are bedwetting. And once we fix up the craniums and the sacrums, then this is where it's nice, because then with my understanding about quantum biology, I start to loop in the blue light discussion with parents and educating them about blocking the blue light after dark and red light therapy and all this type of stuff. We are really able to help children turn the corner in terms of those autonomic dysfunctions, such as bedwetting, such as moods, and etc. But for coming back to adults, what can they do? Firstly, understand the situation. They have to find the right team, because it's really hard to find a dentist that has graduated from thinking of the mouth as just teeth and now thinks about jaws. But it's even harder to find a dentist that has graduated from thinking about jaws and breathing and is actually starting to think about the head. So those are the dentists that, if I may say so, are few and far between. But then in addition to that, you need to find an osteopath that's willing to play ball as well. Because what a lot of the osteopaths don't realize is that the mouth is what actually closes the postural circuit. And so when the teeth come together, that basically tells the head how to sit on the spine, as well as a bit of peripheral vision and vestibular system. So when the teeth are off, that's when we're going to start to throw out postures. And so we need an osteopath that can help release the cranium, but then we need the right dental appliances that can help in rearranging the teeth and guide the redevelopment of the jaws to an optimal level, which is in sync with the cranium and with the craniosacral mechanism. And so it's got to be done like together. So the way that I do it is I actually have my osteopath in the room whenever I'm delivering these appliances. And so as soon as I put an appliance in, the osteopath is palpating the cranium and he's feeling for what Sara's response is to the appliance. And if it's too strong, he'll say to me, Jalal, Sara's head's not happy with this. You've got to change it. He doesn't know what needs to be changed. He just knows that something needs to be changed. And so I might reduce the height of an appliance, or I might bend a wire here or there. And initially, when I was doing this type of stuff, it was more arbitrary because I had no idea what needed to be adjusted. But you just kind of twist something or reduce something a little bit and see what happens. And then the way he usually says it, Cole, he says, okay, now Sarah's head is singing. So he can feel that respiration, that motion of the bones in his hands. And that confirmation for me that Sarah's happy with this appliance. I can't hurt her. Let's see her in 4 or 8 weeks and we'll do another adjustment. And this is where we kind of, it's a very physiological force that we are applying rather than a mechanical force. We're not really forcing our way through. We're not forcing the issue. We're not forcing development of the jaw. We are not even doing the healing. We are just unlocking the key for the body to do its own healing. And so it's a very different kind of, there's a lot less ego as a clinician that's involved in this. It's more about just working through nicely and slowly and applying those physiological changes. So like one of the appliances that I like to use, which adult listeners can look out for, is something called the ALF appliance, Advanced Lightwire Functional Appliance. I believe that to be one of the best appliances out there. It's not a new appliance. It's been around for several decades and was actually designed by a dentist and an osteopath who were working together 30, 40 years ago. So it's something which has stood the test of time. It's just pretty hard to find because not many dentists are using it because they rather do crowns and veneers and cosmetic work. I just have a passion for this because it's really healing people. And it's just really nice because we can loop in a lot of other aspects, such as the light discussion and the grounding and the sun and the nutrition and all that type of stuff. So really, it's the type of care that I'm delivering is starting to turn into a lot more than just drill and fill, which is super exciting.
That was really interesting because it's triggered another question on a similar line of something I see all the time that's really common that originates in the jaw, which is tooth grinding or bruxism. And I have had a variety of different opinions from dentists and therapists on how to treat it and what causes it. So I'd absolutely love to hear your views and what you think causes it, because when there are about 10 different sort of theories, you have no idea, is this the right one for me or for the person who's got the problem? And this is again, like the crowded teeth, very, very common.
Yeah, like now we're going deep, so strap in. Okay, so first thing I want to say is that when it comes to crowded teeth, I would really like listeners to understand that those teeth are actually, if they're crowded, if one tooth is a little bit here, another tooth is a little bit there, they're actually there for a reason. They're serving you at the moment. They're actually helping you breathe. They're helping you function they're helping your posture in a functional way. So what happens is, as I've discussed, you have a bent cranium if you have crowded teeth. And so if we straighten teeth in a twisted cranium, what we do is we lock in those cranial strains, we lock in those sacral strains, and that person can never, ever get out of them. And that is when they start to have headaches arise after braces started, migraines, TMJ issues, grinding, clenching, all those types of things. They might start to get left hip pain or right back pain, or their right shoulder might start to droop down and they can't breathe as well as they usually could. All because the orthodontist and the dentist created a beautiful smile, but the picture frame is all wonky and bendy. And it can be reversed. It just requires a lot of hard work by someone that kind of has the approach that I do, because we're dealing with people that have got chronic craniofacial pain. So it's not just the clinical service delivery, but also the emotional aspect of it as well. Imagine being in pain all day, every day. So you've got to really understand that concept of like straightening teeth in a twisted cranium, not a good idea. And then the second thing, in answer to your question, is like there's different body types, just like there's an ectomorph, a mesomorph, an endomorph. There's also different types of teeth, and some people have big teeth. Some people have smaller teeth that are a bit more slender. Some people have long teeth. Some people have shorter teeth. And so, I mean, I see this on a daily basis. And my take from that is grinding, clenching, protruding of the jaw forward as a way of grinding. These are all kind of natural quirks which we have that are suited to the type of teeth that we have been endowed with. But what happens is, and this is where I'm going to go deep, I was lucky to learn some impressive methodologies from a dentist that's now passed. His name was Tony Ansell. He was in Sydney, Australia. He passed a few years back, but he had worked out that there are kind of, in terms of Ayurvedic terms, there's like a kapha, pitta, and I think a vata. So there's 3 types of body types.
The doshas, yeah.
That's it. And he actually correlated them to the cones in the eye, the red, the blue, the green. Just like if you're ever like changing a color of a graphic on your website, you've always got to type in the RBG code, right? Because every color's got an RBG code. And that's why there's 3 colored cones in our eyes, the RBG. This is where the dentistry starts to go quantum. But those doshas, as you just reminded me of the name, thank you. There's a primary dosha, but then there's a secondary and there's a tertiary. And so someone might have a primary dosha, which is their primary strength, but then they've got a secondary one, which is their secondary strength, and a tertiary one, which is the tertiary strength. But each primary dosha grinds in a specific way. And so my job is to work out what is their primary dosha. And so I use kinesiology to work that out. And then I work out, okay, I know what this person's dosha is. Now I'm going to have a look inside their mouth and see, are the wear patterns in their mouth matching what their dosha is? And if it is, I'm happy, nothing to worry about. But if they're not, if they're matching their secondary or their tertiary dosha, then I know that this person has denatured from their primary strength, from their primary dosha. And so because they've denatured, I know something's wrong. And so we can use specifically designed occlusal splints to bring that person back to their primary dosha instantly. And we can mimic that to show the patient. And there's something that I can do in the mouth to mimic these splints that I make. And then we redo the muscle testing and we show the patient, and they're just staggered by like the change in strength or the improvement in balance, etc. So there's no selling involved, because when they feel better, when I'm mimicking the splints, they're like, when can I have this splint? And basically with these splints, I'm able to bring them back from their secondary or tertiary denature back to the primary. And that's when they are now on the platform to benefit from healing with all the circadian and the quantum and the nutrition and everything. Because if the posh is off, that quantum communication highway can't function properly, right? And so you can eat all the right food in the world, you can have all the right light environment, but you're only going to get somewhere. And I've seen it personally when I've been working with clients who have been just in my capacity as a quantum health clinician, where I make progress, but then I hit a roadblock where I can't get any further with them. And a lot of the time when I start to ask these questions about posture, there's a long history of cranial and sacral issues. And so yeah, that's kind of like the quantum aspect to the dentistry that I do, in addition to all the craniosacral, is like kinesiology to work out what is their dosha, see if they're denatured. We put different colors in front of the eyes and see how their muscles respond to that. And from there, we're able to know, okay, this is where they are right now. This is what we've got to do to bring them back to their primary strength. And once they're back to their primary strength, which might take 2 or 3 months of nighttime wear, then they're like, okay, now they're on the like fresh road to recovery. And yeah, it's really exciting work.
Oh, definitely. Because when there's a solution to something, because that's a very complicated, deep problem, and when there is a solution, it gives people hope. Because yes, I know people who do everything right, light wise and food and move and everything, and there's still a problem. But I often say to people, problems in the head, well, they start in the head and work their way down. So you can have a knee problem from a tooth issue, or from grinding, or from all of the subjects that you've touched on. Because like you said, the teeth and the crowding, when they crowd, do they turn to the side a bit to sort of allow air in and out more efficiently, or how does it work? Because I think that the thing that you said about if people have had orthodontistry and it's locked everything in place, that is reversible, isn't it? You just need to be aware that it's happened and you've done it.
Yeah, so I mean, these are the type of people that are seeing a physiotherapist once a month or a chiropractor or an osteopath, and they have all these amazing adjustments and they feel great. And as soon as they walk out their door, they have that first meal where they start to use their teeth, they snap back into their old strain patterns. That's why it never lasts. And so it is definitely salvageable. And so we need to deprogram the entire cranium and the entire sacrum via the mouth by not letting the teeth touch. And so that's where we use occlusal splints to help break that circuit. And then we can start to rewire the circuit by doing something to the jaws, doing something to the teeth, so that they are now in a new position and a new bite that suits the corrected cranium.
Yeah, and they still need to, yeah, all their quantum. I think it was a real gem that if you go to the chiropractor or physio, and then when you go and eat, that's when that's when everything starts to go backwards. That was a really useful tip, because I'm very interested in sort of, there's a problem, but what's a sort of indicator of this problem? And I think that was a very useful sort of example for people. And I'm sure there are people who exactly what you've described it happens to. I think on the subject of stuff in the mouth, that the people, of course, are really interested in fillings and different materials for tooth implants. And of course, there's the mercury aspect. So I'll let you do all of your talking on the mercury. Personally, what I just use some IMD sometimes to bind it, and I sleep on a Magnetico, but I've got quite a decent tan, so my melanin deals with my mercury. And then I think you're going to know a lot more about it. And actually, I think you said you tested your personal mercury and it was insignificant, and I don't know whether you use it in your practice now, but you will have. Maybe you just want to talk on those subjects of the drill and fill kind of style of dentistry, because again, people will have done things in the past just because they didn't know.
Yeah, 100%. So 40, 50 years ago, mercury fillings was like the gold standard, the mercury standard. And I see plenty of patients with mercury in their mouths, and they're healthy, they're vibrant, they've got vitality about them, and it's not even a question for them if the mercury is making them ill. I have similar patients with the same predicament. They're healthy, they're vibrant, they're loving life, and they come to me and they ask for their mercury fillings to be replaced. And so there's definitely merit the to the thought process behind mercury fillings are bad for you because mercury leaks into your system, and why would we want any of that? That in addition to that, mercury is so toxic from a dental perspective, where we have special provisions in place in our practice where there's a safe mercury or amalgam removal, where there's a special tank that captures all of the mercury before the wastewater goes into the commons. And so then that has to be kind of emptied out and taken away and dealt with securely and safely. So if it's so dangerous for it to go into the common waters, how is it still safe for it to be in our mouth, right? And so I understand if patients want to have it out, but I also take caution on the fact that there's a lot of people that are having mercuries being removed in blue light. And I remember Dr. Cruz saying on one podcast, and I could be wrong, but he said that when you're removing mercury in a blue lit room, it changes the quantum spin of the particulate mercury in a bad way. I think it changes it from singlet to triplet. And I think there's merit to that. And so if mercury is being removed, there might be all the right things being done from an air evacuation or suction perspective, because there's special units that you can buy that are suctioning air in addition to the heavy volume suction that's next to the patient's tooth. And there's rubber dam and a whole host of other processes that we can implement to make sure that the mercury removal is safe. I think doing it in a blue lit room that isn't well ventilated is not a good idea. I've heard Dr. Cruz say in the past that mercury is still in his mouth. And I feel that on the tree of health or on the tree of healing, where someone's really unwell with autoimmune conditions or whatnot, the lowest hanging fruits are not mercury fillings and root canal therapies. It's circadian rhythm, it's nutrition, it's stop having a deuterated diet, clean yourself of deuterium, detoxing after you've increased your redox, grounding, all those types of things. Like mercury isn't the first thing that people should be going for.
Yeah, I agree, because with deuterium, I wasn't going to bring it up, but then from a chemical perspective, it's a hydrogen isotope, and hydrogen's in group one of the periodic table with metals. So therefore, deuterium is a heavy metal, and
Yes.
it's a much bigger cause of concern than mercury, because people don't realize processed food full of it, out of season fruit. That's not so much of my concern. But then again, people will tell me, oh, I don't eat tuna, but then they eat a whole load of other processed food. So I bring up or people want to have their fillings taken out and they're still eating a standard American or Western diet. So I just say the deuterium is like up here, and the mercury is a much lower sort of problem. And you're correct about the trifecta, that in order to have mercury manifest symptoms, people need to have leaky gut. The EMFs will also change the properties of how the mercury behaves. So there are other factors, and I've seen lots of people with lots of fillings who seem happy. And also, for people who didn't know, Dr. Cruz used to be a dentist as well. So I think
Yes.
it's sometimes, I ask around so that the listeners can get an opinion of lots of different people before just rushing out and doing something, spending a lot of money, and it might not even do anything, if not create a fresh problem. So thank you for that. Also, the other question that's quite common, people get frightened of root canals. And I think in a previous podcast, you said if there's nothing wrong with it, leave it in. But if there's something wrong with it, then maybe consider. But how would somebody know there's something wrong with it? Because people can read things on the internet and all of a sudden attribute all of their problems to their root canal, and there's nothing wrong with it. It's something else.
Really, really good question. Just one thing to add about the excellent comment that you made about deuterium. Because hydrogen is the building block of pretty much every element on the planet, it's the most ubiquitous atom. It must mean that then that deuterium is the most ubiquitous heavy metal, much more than mercury, which is why what your point, Sarah, about deuterium as being much more important a consideration than mercury is spot on. So nicely done. Coming back to your question about root canal therapies, yeah, I mean, there's the biological dentists are very heavily against root canal therapies. A lot of people think that I'm a biological dentist. I'm not even really sure what a biological dentist is, because dentistry is biology at the end of the day. Maybe I'm a biophysics dentist, but at the end of the day, I'm just a dentist that's passionate about healing people, and I feel that the best way to heal them with my methods is circadian biology, quantum biology, and all of this postural craniosacral stuff. And I think those are all foundational prior to anything else. And so root canal therapies, yes, I think they do block meridians. And how do we know if a root canal therapy that might be inadequately performed or is failing, how can that be causing systemic symptoms? Or is there a tooth that has got some sort of issue which is showing up in the mouth, but is actually because of systemic, some sort of systemic issue on the meridian? The only way to find that out is through bioresonance, in my opinion. So I have a bioresonance machine that I'll be implementing in my practice in the next 4 to 6 weeks, which is very exciting. And that can really take it to the next level, where if someone is really worried about a tooth or a root canal therapy and they want to know is it causing an issue, then with my stylus, I can place that on each tooth, and use the bioresonance scanner to tell me what's going on, to see what is the electrical conductivity of that tooth, and the energy conductivity of that tooth. And then we go from there. So it's not something which I'll be doing for every single patient. It's just something, if there's sufficient demand for it, I might start to loop it in. But yeah, that's to my knowledge, that's the only way to know.
That's really interesting because when I trained in functional neurology, we did learn that each tooth corresponds to another muscle in the body, but then it's, of course, a two-way system. So there is a book I read a long time ago, you've probably heard of it, called Headache in the Pelvis. So this ties back into what you were saying about sacral problems can manifest at the other end of the body and vice versa. So would that be possible that you could have toothache or jaw ache, but it's the other way around? Like you were saying, there's a problem systemically, yet it's manifesting in the mouth, because the classic phrase in fascial work is find the problem, locate the pain and find the problem somewhere else.
Yep, spot on. I completely agree with that. Like a common example we see in my practice is people with pain in their right shoulder, but they've got liver and gallbladder issues. And so we can test that immediately because we can put some sort of liver gallbladder homeopathic remedy in one hand and do muscle kinesiology testing in the other hand, and like their strength goes through the roof. So which tells us that this patient would benefit from the gallbladder or the home gallbladder remedy or the liver homeopathic remedy, and so then we know that it confirms by deduction that liver or gallbladder has got issues with it, and that's a right shoulder pain showing up, not a liver pain. So the teeth are definitely on the meridians. They are sometimes the culprits behind systemic issues, but as you said, it's a two-way system, and it can definitely be vice versa.
That's great. Have you got any sort of examples of people you've seen who had a particular problem and it turned out to be something we're describing, just as an example? Because there are, like you say, classic referred pain, like the liver and shoulder. That's quite a well-known one. But then there are other ones, like, for example, I know that there's vestibular system to knees. That's just one I always look for. But then there are obviously lots of them, and you've seen a lot of patients and people, and sometimes there's always one that you think I never would have guessed it was coming from there.
So like I've suspected in many patients that this particular root canal therapy could be causing a systemic issue. So I'll go through and have a look at that Chinese meridian chart with the teeth on it, and kind of correlate to see if things are if things are correlating the way that I think they are, and then we'll have that discussion. And at the end of the day, it's up to them if they want to have the root canal therapy, that tooth taken out and an implant replaced. But there's one which because I've only recently kind of started to implement the bioresonance machine, or it will be done in the next 4 to 6 weeks. But one which I was like almost 100% sure just on intuition was a young girl that suffered from long-standing gut issues, was doing everything right and listened to me on all the kind of nutritional things and eating local, seasonal, was doing all the right circadian things. Like I couldn't fault her on anything. And she was also struggling with hypothalamic amenorrhea, which has since fixed up. As we know, that's to do with light signals into the hypothalamus. But her gut just wouldn't settle down, and we were doing the bone broths and this and that, and she had a upper left second premolar which had a root canal therapy. It's the only tooth she's ever had any work done to. The rest of the mouth was pristine. Even the root canal therapy looked good on the x-ray, but that correlated from memory with her digestive system, and so I did raise that with her, and so she's thinking about it.
Yeah, that's a really good one, because I think the key take home is she did everything else first, whereas
Yes.
people are very quick to blame something else, and they haven't put other, all the low hanging fruit that are free, like quantum, seeing the AM sun, blocking blue light first. So that's an interesting story.
I think it's a symptom of the fact that we like to. One of the issues with centralization of anything is an abdication of responsibility, right? And so if we're going to go decentralize in our mindset and start to seek out holistic or alternative solutions regarding health or anything for that matter, it means you've got to take responsibility back upon yourself. But blaming everything on a root canal therapy is still kind of sidelining responsibility and still putting it on something else that somebody did without first going and doing all the things like circadian, quantum, nutrition, grounding, etc., etc.
Yes, absolutely. Taking control of our own lives.
Yes,
Yeah, so
I
I've got,
think
sorry.
after you.
I was just going to say, in terms of looking after your mouth, nothing not to do with food and diet now. What can you suggest, whether it's quantum or don't use fluoride toothpaste or don't use harsh mouthwashes or don't brush your teeth too hard or whatever? Just sort of practical things, also quantumly as well, as in is there certain kind of mineral rinses people say quinton that would be beneficial, because I know the mouth's very absorbent? And then what about light therapy, like red light therapy in the nose or in the mouth, or sunbathing with your mouth open, just that kind of stuff that's sort of quite general and relevant to everybody, but just excluding food for the moment, because that'll just complicate everything.
No, look, that's a good question. I think with oral hygiene, it really is keep it simple. We can sometimes tend to get into the trap of making health really complicated and making this really, really long list of things that we need to do on a daily basis, not just for our mouths, but for everything. And then it becomes so long that we miss out half of them. But brush your teeth using a soft brush, ideally one that's got natural fibers in it. And with toothpaste, I kind of recommend some of these newer toothpastes that have hydroxyapatite in them. That is what the teeth are made of. It is a topical application. Whether it really gets absorbed into the teeth or not is a different story, but there's no harm. And the other thing that I do regularly, I wouldn't do it every day, but definitely 5 times a week, is oil pulling with extra virgin coconut oil. And I'll do that for an extended period. Like, it's not a 30-second job. Like, you got to do it for at least 5, 7, 10 minutes. So generally, if I'm making a steak for breakfast, then or some sausages for the kids, etc., then I'll do the oil pulling while I am cooking the meat on the barbecue. Yes, sometimes I have meat on the barbecue at 6 a.m., but that's the Australian way.
Oh yeah, the thing is, if we get into topics of weird breakfasts, I could write a whole book on what people do secretly, because people that share their food online, that's not the really sort of unusual things that I get to hear about from clients and from like yourself. So yeah, a barbecue at 6 a.m. doesn't surprise me at all. I think it's something, I'm sure other people do that as well. But that's interesting. Actually, back to the oil, you've literally read my mind, because I was going to ask about that, because I know you can use very good quality virgin olive oil or MCT oil, that's good quality as well, and the
Yeah.
coconut. But then some people, and I've thought about it, add things to it such as tea tree oil. And I'm just going to like delving in now to the gut microbiome, because obviously tea tree oil is antibacterial, and again that's very Australian as well. So what do you think about adding things to the coconut, or do you think it's overcomplicating?
Um, if the person has the time and the willingness and the energy to do it, I don't think there's anything wrong with it as well, because I don't think those things cause harm. So if they are adding tea tree oil or something else to make it smell nicer, taste nicer, work nicer on the gut, I'm all for it.
Oh, that's great. That's because again, using aromatherapy oils internally, that's a whole other sort of area. But again, when it comes to the actual microbiome in the gut, in the mouth, sorry, what would you suggest? Maybe just simple things, including I like back to again that all the microbiomes light sensitive, so it would be back to is using light therapy and going out in the sun with your mouth open. Would that benefit your mouth microbiome, or do you have any other sort of insights or do's or don't do's?
Well, red light penetrates into the body like 20 centimeters, right? So I'm not necessarily out in the sun with my mouth open, and because I just trust that the red light will get through. So once again, just keeping it simple. Let's not make it too complicated. So I mean, there are brushes out there that have UV light coming out of them. I think Bristol, Bristl, is one. So I have I've got to talk to them about that, and I just want to learn what are the wavelengths of UV that they are using, just to see and check the research to see if there's what that does to the microbiome. But from what I know about the gut microbiome, the more UV light you have, the greater the diversity of the microbiome. So UV light in the mouth is definitely something which would be beneficial. But I think I think if we have if we have a balanced oral environment with good saliva production, with oil pulling in the morning, good nutrition, and red light therapy, just that naturally happens if you're outside, I think you're in good, you're fine. And
No,
good
that's
oral hygiene, of course.
Yeah, I'm going to go an oil pull afterwards. I think regarding the UV question, when it comes to UV in the gut, it can't penetrate because it'll only go in a few millimeters. Yet
That's
put
correct.
the UV directly on the cells and the bacteria, that's a whole different process. Because of course the gut microbiome itself makes light, and there'll be a light show that goes on down there, but it's like an enclosed party. We can't
Yes.
do anything, and I 100% just leave the sun to deal with that because it's obviously mediated via the photoreceptors in the eye. I just genuinely don't know anything about putting the UV literally on the microbes, and obviously the cells in the mouth are extremely thin, thin layered, which is very useful in some ways. But again, I really don't know, and I think that's a really interesting question that you've brought up, because with that particular toothbrush, I know for certain it's EMF safe because I know some people involved in it. But again, I think it's always nice to have questions and sort of, this is a really interesting idea. I wonder what will happen. And just allow it, like you say, check out what the research says and then draw your conclusions later. So before we close, is there anything else that you wanted to bring up or talk about, or let the listeners know? Because again, you see a lot of people on a daily basis, so they're going to ask you the same questions over and over, and something maybe that you want to share with the listeners and the viewers.
I like to share with them a parting thought of mine, which is something that I've come to embrace much more in the past 6 to 9 months or so. And that is, I personally, like I would say many people in the quantum space, talk a lot about how electrons and protons and how they are behaving are kind of like the foundation. We need to get those right. We need to get the mitochondrial electron transport chain right, and the proton pumping, and ATPase and all those types of things. And in order to get the electrons to behave properly and the hydrogens to dance and the protonicity and the fascia and all those types of things, we need to start eating right, and we need to start movement, and we need to start grounding, and we need to start morning sun, etc. So then if we rewind a little bit, we have to ask ourselves, what has caused that person to kind of leave the sun, leave grounding, completely move away from nature and disconnect? What has caused them to eat the foods that they eat and to make the choices that they've made? And I believe it's either conditioning from society, as well as conditioning from parents and family, as well as just traumas that someone has been through along the way. That might have been physical, emotional, sexual traumas as a child, adolescent, anything. And so any of these things can all kind of dictate how someone can connect to source, to consciousness, where we have this field of intelligence. I know I'm opening up a can of worms. Sorry, Sarah.
No, it's fine. It's my fault. I like that kind of worms.
So like there's this field of consciousness which is like a universal intelligence. There's unlimited possibilities, and consciousness decides what those possibilities collapse down into in the reality that we see. And so if someone loses their connection to consciousness, and that may be through faith, or it may be through meditation or prayer or shamanic healing or whatever the case is, if they can't tap into that source, then they are kind of trapped within this cage of the choices that they're making. And so I think we as clinicians should be thinking not necessarily just about, okay, you've got to start eating differently and all that type of stuff. We should be kind of asking questions about emotion and about traumas and about societal conditioning, and helping our clients on a level which is not just kind of the physical reality. And yes, we're dealing with quantum particles, but there's choices that are being driven by a quantum entity, which is consciousness. So I feel that the awareness of consciousness, the ability to tap into it, or the inability to, is the driving force behind all disease and all illness. And it's important that clients, patients, clinicians, all of us understand that, because yes, electrons and protons dance and behave differently when we are unwell, but the specific choices that we are making because of our traumas and conditioning that are making those electrons and protons misbehave.
Yeah, that's what I say for that is what happened before what happened.
Yes.
And I've got a really long intake form because over the years you learn what good questions to ask. So it actually is that big, it deters people, or they'll just say, nobody's ever asked me this before, I don't know what to say. And it's like, well, exactly, that's what I'm trying to help you, because it's like, I don't need to just know what you do today. I need to know much more than that, because we're all an individual. And like you were saying, the whole possibility idea, and then the collapsing of the wave function as we make a choice, that we're each an individual, and we're all an N of one, and the more information you can give your practitioner, the better. And I don't mind at all how esoteric it goes or spiritual. I've got a whole section in my form about spirituality, and like nice. I said, it doesn't make any difference if somebody likes angels, or they're a pagan, or a Hindu, or Muslim, or Christian, anything, as long as they're practicing their faith. Especially what I find really interesting is people not practicing their own traditional sort of what their ancestors would have done, because I'm not sure what your ancestral religion would be, whether it's a Sikh, Muslim, or a Hindu, but it does
Islam. Yeah.
Oh yeah, so it would be again connecting with your ancestors. So this gets sort of even more esoteric, that it's like this, you are not alone. You've got your ancestral lineage, you've got whatever you want to believe in for spiritual entities, and as well you've got the connection to source, which sometimes I say is like your higher self without your frontal lobes getting in the way, or again, like Carl Jung would say, the collective unconscious, and we can all feel part of something and feel included. Because I think, again, people who feel excluded, that exclusion or loneliness is a huge driver for things like binge eating or being on your phone all day. And again, you can tell people to stop doing it, but you don't know why they're lonely or why they're on their phone binge eating. It's not just looking at what they're doing, it's like, as you say, the why.
And that's a really nice observation. And the converse to that is, I mean, I know people that have got terrible lifestyle habits, like eating rubbish all year round, completely out of sync with nature, barely get any sun. They're doing so many things wrong. Like, whereas if I think about doing an audit of their lifestyle, I'd probably be tearing my hair out. But they're perfectly healthy, and they're 83, and they might smoke or whatever the case is. And it just goes to show that sometimes you can even defy what we believe to be the laws of health, if you are strongly connected to source, and you have laughter, and you have community in your life. That is sometimes enough to go over all these other issues which other people are struggling with.
Yeah, you literally read my mind about the laughter, because I work or have worked a lot with seniors, and the ones that are just like the best laugh ever, and they just say anything, but they're really sociable. And yes, they're in their house all day with the heating like the Bahamas and eating biscuits and cake, but they have, they're like super funny still. And yes. I think, like you say, the whole thing about the humor is those kind of people, and I've got friends who are like that yes, they do everything wrong, but they're always in a good mood, and they raise everybody else's vibration and electrons and dopamine, so that those people do serve a big role. And like everything, like you say, no matter what, I always find there's always more, and there are always people that don't obey the rules, but then what are the rules? So
exactly. I had a thought the other day when I was watching sunrise, which was like, there's all this talk about blue zones, right? There's like 5, I think, blue zones around the world, and there's one in Japan, and there's one in Sardinia, etc. But we can create our own blue zones if we live life right.
Yeah, and be kind as well, I think, because it's all about the law of abundance and laws of attractions, that whatever you give out, you get back in return, sometimes several fold, whether it's nice or nasty. So I always think and try and stop and think, always be kind. Don't just go and explode at that person that's just written a really horrible comment. Just leave it, ignore it. You don't know how much they're hurting, and just walk away. Don't feed it, just stop it. And then again, just showing sort of kindness to people, it then comes back towards me. Yeah, sure, I do stuff wrong, and we all like lose the plot sometimes, but I always think, if I can't do anything, just be kind.
100%. Love it.
Okay, so thank you very much for your time. I've really enjoyed talking to you, and you've delivered some really interesting insights and information into people on the teeth and quantum biology. So I can't thank you enough for coming on.
That's a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me, Sarah.